Hi everyone, welcome to the second video of Communicare Communities. And in this video, again, it's going to be unedited. So there may be some ums and some ahs, and there's no cutaway, there's no special sound effects, there's no PowerPoints, which as a former communication professor, I always used to enjoy using a PowerPoint. So it's just going to be me and you and me speaking to this microphone and this camera. So let's see how we go. What we're going to look at is rhetoric. And I want to basically challenge us to think that it's more than we might think it is. It's actually beyond a few things. It's beyond the bad press. It's beyond the message. It's beyond words even. It's beyond even your own community. So let's take a look at this a little bit more. Rhetoric, beyond the bad press to reason persuasion. Beyond the message to considerations of style. Beyond words to a greater consideration of symbols. And beyond your community to extend influence out to other communities. So that's where we're going in this short video. So first of all, let's have a look at beyond the bad press. And John Locke, he essentially described rhetoric in the way that most of us perhaps think of it these days. He said rhetoric is that powerful instrument of error and deceit. And so with that comes along ideas of exploitation, manipulation, and spin, PR spin. In other words, deceit by clever means of persuasion. But classically, they used to think about rhetoric in different ways. If we look at Plato and Aristotle and Cicero, we can get a better understanding of the depth, if you like, involved in rhetoric and persuasion, the persuasive use of rhetoric. So, for example, let's have a look at a quote by Plato. He said, "Rhetoric is the art of enchanting the soul, the art of winning the soul by discourse." And that word enchanting is quite interesting. It's not just about manipulating, but it's about persuading. It's about bringing along the emotions and the mind as we think about the message and to persuade one to accept and reason through the acceptance of that message. Aristotle says rhetoric is the faculty of discovering in any particular case all of the available means of persuasion. Cicero, he says rhetoric is one great art composed of 5 lesser arts. Now we're going to come back to those 5 lesser arts that Cicero is actually referring to in the next video. And you'll see also it links quite closely to Aristotle's thoughts on this as well. But I found one of the best definitions of rhetoric in the San Diego State University's site in their introduction to their Department of Rhetoric and Writing Studies. And here it is here. Rhetoric refers to the study and uses of written, spoken, and visual language. It investigates how language is used to organize and maintain social groups, construct meanings and identities, coordinate behavior, mediate power, produce change, and create knowledge. Now that's packed with meaning and ideas, and we're going to unpack this in later videos. For example, one of the things that we'll look at later is a concept of the circuit of culture. And the circuit of culture is a way of unpacking meaning attached to all sorts of cultural phenomena, whether it be an event, a person, an idea, an advert, any sort of way, any sense of communication, action, activity, event, and so on, can be analysed from a cultural perspective. And that's really useful because it just unpacks the complexity attached to some of this incredible communication and concepts. So we'll look at that further. As I say, this is an unedited video, so the ums and ahs and those little sort of trains of thought that go off one way or the other or get stopped between stations, all of that is going to be raw and unfiltered, at least in these next few videos. So, beyond the bad press to reason persuasion. And as I said, that definition by San Diego State University in the Introduction to Department of Rhetoric and Writing Studies, that really carries a lot of meaning. And as I say, I'm going to unpack it later in other videos. But beyond the bad press to reason persuasion, it's not just about manipulation, but it's about reason persuasion, engaging the thoughts, the mind, cognition, and emotions, what we feel, bringing both of those together to communicate what we see as a worthwhile and valid message. Beyond the message to style. Rhetoric is beyond the message to style, a consideration of style. How it is said or said is persuasive, as persuasively as important as what is said. So that brings up ideas of, well, who is the intended audience? How are they most likely to be enchanted by our message, as Plato might say? So it's about making our message compelling in content and style. In content and style. For example, is our tone friendly? Is it authoritative? Is it meeting the expectations of how our audience expects to be engaged? Should we be more empathic, demonstrating that we know what it's like to be in their shoes? All of these are elements that are impacted by style, our choice of symbols to communicate the style, the message and the style. And this comes down to salience. Salience, how we communicate can help make what we communicate more important and relevant to our audience. And that's what salience is. It's about something being important, about being prioritized in the minds of our audience. It's not just about what the sender wants to send, right? It's not just about what the communicator wants to communicate, but it's about tapping into what is important in the minds of our audience. And it's not just their minds, but what they feel is important. What they feel is important. And that's how we get influence. And it's tapping into those thoughts and feelings and enabling and engaging in salience. So it's not just about words, it's about symbols. Beyond the words to symbols. So rhetorical devices include images and sounds and colours and shapes. In other words, any act of communication activity that's a shortcut to meaning. It's a shortcut to meaning. That's what symbols are. They're essentially shortcuts to meaning. Consider the obvious. A traffic signal. It's green, it's red, it's amber. Right? It's a shortcut telling us to stop, to go, to wait, to pause, and all of this complex human behavior that's involved. But that red light, that green light, that amber light, that's a shortcut to meaning. A tsunami siren alert on a beach, right? If in places now where they've installed tsunami sirens, if that siren goes off, that's a shortcut to meaning. We know what that means, right? We're going to rush off. We're going to gather our families. We're going to get our precious documents and so on and take off for higher ground. The politician shaking strangers' hands and hugging babies. That's a shortcut to meaning. That's a shortcut to meaning. They're wanting our votes. They're communicating that they care. Now, some rhetorical devices are not so obvious. So, for example, statistics. These are rhetorical devices. They are persuasive devices. Statistics, when someone quotes statistics at us, they are communicating scientific authority based on those quantitative metrics. Environmentalists displaying doomsday clocks showing 5 minutes to 12 o'clock. These are rhetorical devices. These are communicating particular messages with a sense of urgency, with a sense of persuasion and influence. Politicians calling for tougher prison sentences, describing drug abuse as a disease infecting society. These are persuasive devices. They have particular weight of influence with particular communities. Those rhetorical devices may not work the same with all communities. And we're going to unpack this again in later videos. But all of the above, all of those, it's all rhetoric. Now, I'm not saying it's all good, it's all bad, but it's all rhetorical devices that are used and employed by particular communities, by particular communicators to influence particular communities. So beyond your community, rhetoric is beyond your community to reach out to other communities. And I want to give one more definition that comes from Michael Eidenmuller, who's associate professor at the University of Texas now. But in 2011, he gave this really useful definition in a Voice of America interview. And it was modified for print. But it's essentially, rhetoric is a rational study and artful practice of human symbol use, especially if not exclusively with words. When and where the symbols target identifiable communities of interest to create, enhance, undermine, or otherwise influence human belief, attitude, emotion, judgment, behavior. Now, there's a lot in that, and I'll just read it out briefly again. Rhetoric is a rational study and artful practice of human symbol use, especially, if not exclusively with words, when and where the symbols target identifiable communities of interest to create, enhance, undermine, or otherwise influence human belief, attitude, emotion, judgment, behavior. Now, he uses that term, communities of interest, and that is really useful for our conversation. Because communities of interest, that's exactly the same term that I used when I was doing my postgraduate research into telecommunications policy for people with disabilities, and also then looked at how it related, telecom policy related to communities and that were rural, that were disadvantaged by a tyranny of distance, that were out in the outback or in rural and regional areas, and so on. So I used all of this concept of communities of interest to explore how policymakers were engaging with different members of the public and different communities. And communities of interest is useful because it gets away from this idea that audiences are just passive, that they are actively engaging and making meaning. So it's more informative than the term audience, communities of interest. As I said, it's emphasizing that these groups are active meaning makers. They're not passive recipients of information. It's also linked to salience, that a community of interest. These are communities that you are targeting their interest points. Where are they interested? What are they interested in? It's linked to salience, importance, and relevance. If what we're saying isn't important or relevant to the people we're trying to reach, we may as well forget about our message because we're not going to reach them. It's also bringing up the idea of shared identities. A community is a group that has a shared identity, either through interests, through knowledge, discipline, or profession, or experience, or passion. There's communities. Community is more than just society. It's more than just those different groups in society. They share boundaries that link them in some sort of sense of shared identity. And so they're bonded beyond external boundaries. And you get that idea when you just think about the difference between different groups in society and different communities. So the takeaway messages from this little presentation and video about rhetoric is that rhetoric is much more than we might initially feel or think. And rhetoric is one or more persuasive devices used to communicate the salience or importance of your message to the interpretive community you want to influence. Rhetoric is persuasive discourse. It's a continuing conversation that uses appropriate symbols to engage, communicate, and persuade. So join me in the next video where I'm going to discuss the 5 lesser arts Cicero claims make up that great art of rhetoric. And as always, if you found what I've said interesting or something useful in the video, please press the like button because that'll help the YouTube algorithm see that others are finding this interesting and it will elevate its importance so that others may see it as well. And also feel free to push the subscribe button. Thanks again. See you next time.